Well, welcome to part 2 of Straight Shooting News, the Political Pendulum, episode 6. National security is now in the hands of we, the people. The Defense Department is compromised. So, we're going to start off tonight with this. We're going to get into this balloon thing. The balloon thing that so many people are laughing off, maybe because they're in denial, who knows? Or they're trying to make a chuckle out of it for whatever reason. You got to do what makes you comfortable. But we're going to show you how the political pendulum is swinging back and forth, left and right, left to right, right to left, in a hypnotic fashion until our liberty and freedoms are eroded away. Now we're looking at our country being eroded away. If you weren't concerned after watching part 1, we're going to I'll let you hit a bit here. So I'm going to explain something as we're going to, at the beginning here, we're going to watch the shoot down of the balloon. I want you to watch closely. And I'll tell you about it. We're going to hear from the doc journalist who put a pretty good concerns in there. It's nothing from that you've heard on mainstream media. We're taking a deeper dive and asking the serious questions that need to be answered. So with that, let's start the video. So as you watch, there's the balloon. Bang. It's hit. Now, where did it get hit? It got hit right above the spyware. Now, you would think that you would want to pierce that balloon and let the spyware come down slowly. And hopefully the balloon would act as some sort of parachute. And people are telling me you can't do that, blah, blah, blah. You can't shoot down a balloon. You got to hit it. Well, I may not be an expert, but it's almost like they didn't want to collect that. And they wanted that to go flying down. We have no follow-ups on if they've got it yet. We're dying to see. You see how that came apart? There's something.
Here's the thing about the so-called surveillance balloon coming from China. This thing presumably came over from Alaska and, through Canada and then to the United States, was widely reported once it hit Montana. And we got a lot of reports of people tracking it on their phone and all the rest of it. So there's been a lot of squirrely language out of the DOD and the administration on this. I can tell you right away that the entire story around the balloon as it's been presented is completely unrealistic and untrue. So I don't know exactly why they've put this on, but I can certainly guess based on a few things that have gone on. I printed out a few things about this balloon. Look, we have air defense systems that have been in place in the United States since World War I. And after World War II, they heightened dramatically. During the Cold War, they heightened ultimately. And then by the time you get to 9/11, forget it, right? The whole thing about those airliners being taken over and stuff doesn't make any sense based on the defenses that we had either. So this story that this could just float in and that we just observed it and couldn't stop it because, oh, if we destroyed it, it might cause damage on the ground. Well, anyone who lives, in that part of Canada that it was traveling in, or even before when it was in Alaska, I mean, it wasn't going to damage anybody's home or anything if you took it down. So that excuse is beyond absurd. I want to point out, just based on actual framework and legal references, that as a matter of international law, you can't float a balloon over somebody's territory. When those types of things happen, we get into situations, for example, like during the Cold War, when Khrushchev shot down our U-2. It's, it heightens the whole tension around war, et cetera. So protocols were built in dramatically after those things happened. In 1945, a Japanese balloon bomb killed 6 Americans, 5 of them children, in Oregon. This is on the record, that's Smithsonian, and this only came out years later, of course. But as a result of the Japanese balloon bomb.
Yes, that came out afterwards. That was covered up. The Japanese floated balloons in there and killed Americans, including 5 children. So we've had air defense systems in since World War I. You just can't float a balloon over someone's territory. And the fact this went over Canada and the U.S. is concerning. We'll give you a link to this article in the description of the video. But you really need to start thinking about what just
that they sailed over here. And they did a number of them, and a lot of them didn't do damage because they went off course. There are tons of pictures of these things, and they built in protocols for balloons coming in, and it said if anybody's flying a balloon.
Now there's a picture right from the article. It shows the guys retrieving the balloon back.
You take it out.
1945.
And 2, we identify its origin, and we tell the people who sent it over, if you send any more over, it's an act of war. So that's been in place since 1945. Okay, so we're looking now 75 years later. This isn't something that would just happen and we would just let go over, this thing is flying over Missouri and stuff. So something very strange about it. There's a book that details all of these attacks and the protocols that we built upon after the fact of World War II, called Japan's World War II Balloon Bomb Attacks on North America. They're very well detailed. We've had them, we developed protocols.
See, we represent you with information you're not going to see on TV. And DJ does a great job investigating. These are documented facts. This isn't carnival barking. This isn't to frighten you. This is all documented.
The result of them, so
facts.
the surveillance balloon from China, the story around it and how we dealt with it doesn't make any sense. So finally, when it gets past in North Carolina, we blow it up. As it's heading, cruising on out into the hot zone. I don't know. There's dramatic protocol. This one, a faulty ballast dropping mechanism will cause the balloon to land without dropping its bomb near Tremonton, Utah, February of 1945. We're at war with the Japanese. I'm telling you, we developed all kinds of
He's showing you. These are historic documented facts. This is not new. And this raised
protocols
concerns
around dangerous balloons way back then. So this idea of this thing just sailing over the United States and like, oh, we just noticed it, and oh, we were observing it, never happened in a million years. So that's a really big problem because we're not getting the real story from them. But now we're getting warnings from China like, oh, you shouldn't have shot down our balloon. That's also weird. And then the Pentagon said, well, actually, there's another balloon, and it's over South America. So all of this activity is very strange. And some of it, the part about the balloon going across America was done with our help because I just explained the protocols. So as an act of war, you would send a balloon over somebody's territory. So, and they were like, oh, well, we've seen, in the Washington Post is like, well, it's happened before,
I want to get your take on the response and also China's response and zero in on what you know about potential previous breaches. You've seen more intelligence than anybody other than the president. I'm talking with the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliff, and we've got more in just a moment. Stay with us. Well, John, the Biden administration is trying to minimize this explosive situation in this past week, and the Department of Defense is claiming that there were 3 balloons, Chinese spy balloons, that entered the United States airspace during the Trump administration, and that they were not shot down and they were not disclosed. Can you please tell us the truth and if that's true?
Well, it's not true. I can refute it. Former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper refuted it yesterday. Former Secretary of State and CIA Director Mike Pompeo has refuted it. But Maria, the American people can refute it for themselves. Do you remember during the Trump administration when photographers on the ground and commercial airline pilots were talking about a spy balloon over the United States that people could look up and see even with the naked eye, and that a media that hated Donald Trump wasn't reporting? I don't remember that either, because it didn't happen. As I said to you earlier, this was unprecedented. We have never had a circumstance where an adversary has had spy craft over our country, our continental United States, posing a threat for the better part of a week straight. But beyond that intelligence damage, Maria, the other thing is that the damage that it wasn't just 320 million Americans that were watching this balloon, paralyzed for a week. It was Russia. It was Iran. It was North Korea. It was American adversaries who also were surprised that this type of thing could happen and are frankly thrilled at the possibilities of what they could do to deploy the same type of stratospheric balloon or device over the continental mainland and have this kind of slow, weak, timid, late, frankly, terrible response by the Biden administration.
Well, it has, but just to be clear, you're saying there were not 3 spy balloons from China that entered the United States airspace and traveled and was able to do what we've seen this week.
Yeah, I'm telling you that very clearly. Listen, Maria, it's every time something goes wrong in the Biden administration, there's one of 2 responses. They either find a way to blame the Trump administration, or they try and find a way to say the Trump administration did it too. And that's what they're trying to say here. This happened during the Trump administration. It didn't.
It didn't. How's that? You get that? That's straight. It didn't happen. That's the top spy, the DNI, under Donald Trump when he was in office, where we all kind of felt, well, we weren't worried about our national security. So since 1945, it's been an act of law. If you fly a balloon for someone's country, it violates international laws. Good reason for that. Like I said, we'll put the link to the article in there for you. So this was done with help. So now the question is, who helped? I don't doubt that a bit. I believe this was allowed to happen intentionally. Why would they let it happen intentionally? The Biden family, we know they're compromised. But here's the question. Is the military compromised? We know there's missing funding from the U.S. military. It's unaccounted for with Republicans taking over the purse strings. There's probably going to be hearings into all that. I think they've already said there will be. And the other question here is, how much is missing before 9/11? When the exact same thing, it was an aerial attack on our country that violated. But with that, you got to ask yourself, why did the Biden Defense Department lie? We've seen it all week on the news. That's why we're not even bother playing that. We're going to give you some deep digs right here and take a deep dive into it. Ratcliff confirmed they lied. Now what? Let's continue on with more from TJ.
But the idea that that thing would just float over here on its own is absurd, and our reaction has been absurd. So we have to really take that into consideration. Whatever it is that they're up to in balloon land, one, they're doing it with our consent on some level. And that's the disturbing part, I guess, in all this. The other part, China's little bombast about this, I don't know, the whole thing seems like a weird setup. And then we have Biden going to Camp David. That's weird too. So as if he anticipated a crisis, right? So I think we have to really look at this from a few different levels and say to ourselves, where do we go, in terms of interpreting this? And what are they trying to set up in terms of turning our attention up to the skies? So that becomes maybe a crucial piece for us to look at in relation to this. In terms of international law, it's not done. And, any idea that this was an off-course balloon is also nonsense. The other thing is that we already had a set series of tensions with China. So, and they know that we're having a lot of tensions with Russia. So they wouldn't, this wouldn't happen. And also, if it did happen that way, then they would have stopped it by the time it was in Alaska, because there's all this time to go across Canada and all the rest, and they would have noticed it. Look, they can read a license plate underground in Russia with our satellites here. And one of the satellites that goes, it's right in New England. And that thing can read it in Russia. Okay. So if this thing is just sailing across Alaska and Canada, then they saw it. And also the people who sent it knew it was off course, if that was the story. So both of those are lies. And so it presents a problem about what is the intent here. And the immediate response, of course, should have been to shoot it down. So on our side, we allowed it. That's weird too. And Canada allowed it, so the whole setup for it doesn't make any sense. That's not a logical setup. And so if they were at a Pentagon press conference, my question would be, why did you breach every international normal protocol when you saw this balloon? By the way, the guy that we have operating NORAD is the same guy who would be the commander of the continuity of government, in the event of an emergency. So that guy, his whole job and his whole staff's job is to monitor things that are in space and in the atmosphere around America. So they would have known about this way before. So that's weird. And then the final, the final addition of weirdness on this is Malmstrom Air Force Base. Okay, so as I pointed out, the commander now of Space Force, who they graduated up last summer, General Chance, he served for a decade in Malmstrom, and now he's the Space Force commander. So you've got the COG commander, NORAD, and he has a big history with the 509th, which is the same group as the Roswell bomb squad from 1947 that found the wreckage of a weather balloon, right? So this is very strange, of course, because there's a UFO connection, in fact, with the COG commander who's commanding NORAD now, and then we also have a UFO connection with the Malmstrom Air Force Space Commander, and then you get a balloon which goes right over, and I'm still looking for the exact trail map of this thing, but the idea that it got to Missouri, so if you go Montana, Missouri to Carolinas, it had that whole line. So that's something very unique, I would say, about the trajectory involved, and then the signature of these two UFO events just hanging out there. So I would say that there's, with General Van Herk, who is the COG NORAD commander, and he's the Northcom commander. He gets all three titles. The fact that he's part of the 509th, and then the fact also that we're dealing with this other general who is the Space Force commander, and he's got the whole Maelstrom background, which is where this thing was zooming around. It opens up a lot of issues, but fundamentally and categorically on the news side, if somebody were just to look at it as a straight up news story, the idea that they would let a balloon just go sailing across America in these kind of tense periods of time when people are like making nuclear threats on the other side of the world, it just would never happen. And so we need to keep that in mind in terms, but we're going to be keeping a very close look on this as well. And we know, presumably, they blew it up now once it already did its job, right? Because it's sending that stuff back. It doesn't need to actually physically land. It's probably just communicating all the information as it gets it. So this is what we're talking about. And so with that in mind, the only thing we can do is to continue to press the administration to give us the real story on it when it comes down to it. And I would look for more sky incidents in relation to this, because for me, it's part of a pattern of whatever it is they're setting up here. And hopefully it's, it becomes something that we get ahead of and doesn't really, go for the whole surprise attack type situation, because there certainly is strange things about it. And when we get into EMPs and things of this nature, there are people running over a cliff being like, it's an EMP attack. No, but it's strange. This is the way that you would get intel for how to bomb targets. You'd send a balloon over. But also in the case of China, they know when they send this thing over that we're going to pick it up. So that's weird too. The whole thing is weird on both sides. So therefore, whatever it is, it's a joint activity. So let's keep that in mind. Everyone.
Entire national security team inept.
Absurd consent. Let's kind of look at that. There's nobody could have done that without it being allowed. It's absurd. Biden's going to Camp David. That's where presidents go at wartime. So is this a diversion? Or are we being sold out? We have to ask that question. Remember now, they have nothing to lose. Everything is being exposed, and what we've exposed, and what this Republican excuse me, House could expose is quite serious. Right now, Russia is threatening with nuclear war, and we're allowing a Chinese balloon to fly over the U.S. It's like, why would he even send a balloon? Like you said, we have satellites here, from New England that can read license plates in Russia. So it's done for another reason. The U.S. had to allow it to over. And now you got to keep one thing in mind too, that this was being allowed to fly over Canada also. We have two countries here where the people are pretty upset about what just took place. They're trying to strip away the people in Canada's rights. We showed you the truckers' protests. They're trying to strip away rights from Americans in the U.S. We showed you the truckers' protests there. It kept circling Washington, D.C. And they just violated airspace and broke international law. The other connection, for those of you who don't know what COG is, it's called continuity of government. These people are in place to take control in case of an emergency. The commander and general of NORAD. He just mentioned this Van Herk, I believe his name was. He's NORAD commander, Space Force. So all this technology and abilities we're supposed to have, we're supposed to believe that this just took place, was allowed to take place. There's something really strange going on here, like you said. It's Nostrum Air Force Base, the connections to the unit that had found the weather balloon in Roswell, Texas. Think about that. They always seem to go back in history to try to find something to rub in your face if you're not paying attention, or you have no knowledge of history. Well, that being said, let's move on. And let's hear what Ron Paul said. Ron Paul is a very more peace-minded person, but we're going to let you listen to Marin and what he has to say.
Entire national security team inept, or are they compromised? Whose head needs to roll for allowing a Chinese surveillance balloon to float freely throughout America for a week? Communist China is responding this morning to the United States shooting down the massive stratospheric surveillance balloon, which was able to travel across much of the country this week and hover above several U.S. military installations, some of which are home to U.S. intercontinental missile silos. The balloon said to be sending data back to the CCP in real time as it traveled. But But the CCP's brazenness does not stop there. Now it is claiming that it is now reserving the right to further reaction because of its so-called discontent with the U.S.'s reaction to the surveillance balloon. Joining me right now with the impact to America and what the U.S.'s response should be to China's surveillance balloons is the ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. He is a member of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. He is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator, thanks very much for being here this morning. First, a word on China's response. What could they do, given the fact that they're reserving the right for further reaction?
You know, I think it's appalling. If they want to let us know that it's an accident, don't you think they would want to apologize? The fact that they've already got their back up and they're resisting and talking about retaliation doesn't sound like much of an apology. If there is an innocent explanation for this, and it doesn't seem that there is at this point, but if there were, they should be apologizing. But either way, the Biden administration should have the Chinese ambassador come in to speak to the Secretary of State, and there should be a full examination of the question. With regard to what they should have done, you know, we need a commander-in-chief that's able to respond and a national defense that is able to respond within seconds to minutes to penetration of our airspace. So this sort of long drawn out that we let this drift over the ocean to Alaska, across Canada, and then when they finally decided to do something, it still took them 4 more days. This really is probing our defenses in a way. Even if there was no surveillance on board, they've gotten a great deal of information as to how sluggish the Biden administration is in their response. So if you decide to shoot it down a week later, you probably could have made that decision a lot quicker when it was over a deserted part of either Alaska or before it crossed the coast of Alaska. So this looks very, very weak in the eyes of our enemy, and I think was a huge mistake. But at this point, moving forward, what they need to do is they need to demand a full apology and explanation. If it was supposedly civilian, they should feed us all the data they took in and show us what the balloon was absorbing. And if they're not going to show us that, we tend not to trust that they're telling us the truth.
Well, I don't understand why we are so weak toward our number one adversary. Is it because Joe Biden is compromised with all of the tens of millions of dollars he's taken in? How do you explain to Congress, you know, you all have not had one hearing on the origins of COVID-19. I mean, you have not had one hearing in the Senate on the origins of COVID-19. Now you have some senators, Mark Warner and others trying to, you know, investigate TikTok. You have been all over trying to get to the bottom of COVID-19. But why do you see such a weak response from the Congress and from this president?
You know, it's perplexing. Over 6 million people died, and some people say as many as 15 million people died, and we haven't had one hearing. 15 million people die worldwide, at least 1 million Americans died, and not one hearing. Some of it is conflict of interest. We have many scientists in our country and around the world who are funded by our government, but they're also funded by the Chinese government directly. Some of this is not fully known because they're not disclosing this. When I asked Dr. Fauci in committee about this, he said it was none of my business and that a law protected these people. We know that 1,800 scientists in the NIH received $193 million. This is not chump change. It's a good deal of money. We need to know which companies are paying them, and they should not be on any committees approving. You know, so if they work for Pfizer or Moderna and they get a couple $100,000 a year in royalties, they can't honestly sit on a committee approving these vaccines. So there's a lot that needs to be known, and I'm still trying very hard to get Democrats to come on board. Once we can get one Democrat to sign a document request, the NIH, I think, will start to honor their commitment to the American people and release this information.
So it's all about money then. It's about the money people receive, just the way Wall Street wants to keep investing in the Chinese companies that are tied to the Chinese military because they're making money on it.
It is about money, but it's interesting that I think there's an in-between solution where we don't, have an embargo and no trade with China. I'm not for that. But at the same time, I'm not for sending them any money. We still send research money over there. And what the House Intelligence Committee released in an unclassified report about a month ago was that our money is going to U.S. universities, and then it's going to military research in China. Not even civilian research, but actual military research. The Academy of Military Medical Sciences in China gets money from U.S. Universities. And Fauci would say, nothing to see here because there's an intermediary. And he says, oh, because we subcontracted, it doesn't count. No, it doesn't count. We should not have taxpayer money funding military research in China. It's extraordinary that this still goes on.
It quite is extraordinary. Senator, you are the ranking member on the Homeland Security Committee. Has our homeland been damaged by this balloon?
I think the biggest damage isn't so much, and I haven't seen the intelligence of what we think they've gathered, which is probably damaging, but I think more damaging than even any surveillance is assessing our response time. And like I say, since we've entered into the nuclear age, there are responses that have to occur within seconds to minutes. And the fact that this administration would dither for days over a balloon, I think gives pause to us about how well we're protected and whether or not they have the ability to make decisions that would have to be made in seconds or minutes. So I think by probing our defenses this way and showing a level of ineptitude that is, I guess, surprising, it isn't good, as far as telegraphing this to the rest of the world. And the thing is, if you're going to shoot it down finally when it reaches the Atlantic Ocean, why didn't they shoot it down when it crossed the coast into Alaska, in a remote part of Alaska, or even before it got into Alaska? They had to have seen this coming. And if they didn't see it coming, that's even worse. So, we will have hearings on this, and as we're already in talks with the Democrats, we should have bipartisan hearings on this, and I think ultimately we will. But, if we can't detect a balloon, we're in a world of hurt as far as defending this country.
Real.
There you go. U.S., did you hear that? U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to fund Chinese military research. Now, let's go to the beginning of that now. The apology from China, no apology. Instead, they threaten us. They're checking our response time. Are they really checking our response time? Or was this done to humiliate us in front of our allies? Well, like you said, if it was just a civilian craft, they would share the data with us. They're showing our weakness. And you have to ask again, how compromised are we? Scientists around the world now are being funded by the US and China to kill us with viruses and supposedly the cures. We'll have more on that in part 3 for you. So the US is being actually punked by China, which should tell me that we have a problem in the military and in Washington, D.C. With that, let's move on to, this is a longer clip. Oh yeah, and let's not forget the Fauci connection. Like I said, he should be detained, injunction should be filed against him, freeze all his assets until he can be cleared. There's money coming in, and he's telling Rand it's none of his business. Well, that's what Congress's job is. That's the checks and balances. And when the government can't check and balance these things, our founders left in the hands of we the people. That's why we titled the show the way we did. But let's move on. This is serious. Let's listen to Dan Bongino and Victor Davis Hanson playing you the whole segment because it's important. I want you to listen to it.
And why I have some questions and why I had to jump on here tonight and make sure I spoke to you about this. Because I'm hearing a lot of commentary on this. And I think a lot of it's a little bit off base because why would China sabotage its own diplomatic efforts in a major meeting between the United States, Tony Blinken and Xi, just days away with a balloon? Well, let me give you a likely answer because it'd be kind of weird to come on here, right, and propose a bunch of questions without answers. I mean, they don't pay me to just dump questions on you. Here's a likely answer. China's been playing us for chumps for decades, folks. As I opened up this segment with, they've been flipping us the double-barreled middle finger for a long time now. They've been in our universities with these Confucius Institutes. They've been infiltrating our businesses. They've been stealing our IP, our intellectual property overseas. They've been using government procurement methods to lock out foreigners from their own markets. They've had spy operations. They've even, I don't know if you saw the story a few weeks back, they even set up their version of like their own local police force right here in the United States. They've infiltrated Eric Swalwell's bedroom. Who even knows what happened in there? They had a spy allegedly in Dianne Feinstein, U.S. Senator's office. We all know, of course, about Hunter Biden's bank account, the CEFC, the Chinese energy conglomerate, which, by the way, was also connected to that FBI agent case who was indicted and arrested last week. So how does this all tie together with this balloon story and why I'm talking to you about this tonight? Here is a likely answer. Folks, this isn't the first time they've done any of this. Spied on our congressmen, invaded our universities, stolen our intellectual property, stolen our business secrets, stolen our government secrets. I think I was even part of that GAO leak, my Secret Service file. I got an email from the government, I kid you not, when they were alleged to have stolen all of the employee data from the Government Accountability Office. I was in that one too. This wasn't do you get what I'm trying to get at here? The point of this is, this wasn't a message by China because they don't even feel like they need to send a message. They think we're freaking idiots. We don't protect our colleges. We don't protect our business secrets. We've got spies in Feinstein's office. We've got one of them doing a shh with a Swalwell. They think we're morons. They're like, yeah, screw it. Screw these losers. Fly a balloon over their nuclear facilities. What are they going to do about it? They're going to let it fly over the whole country before they shoot it down over South Carolina. Folks, they've been flipping us off for a long time. This is only an issue because it's not an issue to China. Joining me now is Hoover Institute fellow and a good friend to the program, Victor Davis Hanson. Sir, thanks a lot for joining us tonight. I don't know, this story, you're very welcome. This story is bizarre to me because it doesn't seem like this is an anomaly at all. It only seems to be an anomaly because someone saw the balloon.
Yeah, I think there's two stories here. One is what you mentioned, the act of humiliation. So they're sending a message to Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, Japan. They're saying, this is your ally. You're in our neighborhood, and this is your ally. We send a balloon right through their continent, and they don't do anything. And then they're going to add, this is a pattern, because remember that one of the first things that happened with the Biden administration, they were humiliated by the Chinese in Anchorage, Alaska. And I think this is the third or fourth time in the last 5 years they've done something like this. They destroyed drones in international waters of ours. In 2001, they forced down and rammed an EP-3 spy plane. They confiscated the crew. They ransacked the plane. They took the secrets, and we had to apologize for it. So in their way of thinking, our relationship's asymmetrical, and they can do whatever they want, and we're always going to find an apology. The other side of the story is this administration could have taken this thing down as it approached the Pacific or over the Aleutians in our airspace or water space, but they didn't do it. And I don't think they would have, and I think you're right, unless somebody had saw it. And then the explanations kept changing. They said, well, it's just a weather balloon. It's not very sophisticated. They can find it by spies. And then people pointed out, well, you know, it has a capacity of 2 buses, so they must be experimenting with a big payload, and it could have weapons significance. And maybe this slow-moving balloon can take more accurate pictures. And then they changed and said, well, we wanted to protect people, and we were afraid of the debris. And, you know, Montana's a pretty empty place. And so I think public pressure finally forced the administration to do that. But if we had done anything like that in China, we would be on the brink of a war in their way of thinking. If Donald Trump in 2017 had allowed Putin to take a balloon to go over the United States like that, he would have been impeached, a third time.
And Victor, they've got to be laughing at us, not just because of this incident, but think about it. They know the whole payola and pay for play deal, right? So they have to be thinking to themselves, you have a president of the United States whose son, there's various allegations substantiated by a number of records and reporting, that's been doing business with this Chinese energy conglomerate. They've got to be thinking, How stupid are these people? I mean, the guy shares the president's last name. He's his son. I mean, they have to they've infiltrated our universities through these Confucius institutes forever, and we've done almost nothing about it. These are if the roles were reversed and we were trying to buy off their people, they'd have our people executed over there. I mean, it's just such an asymmetrical relationship.
I think what they're doing, I think they're having an internal debate, and they said, look at what happened in Anchorage. Look what happened in Kabul. Are these people serious? And somebody in the high councils in Beijing said, well, let's send over another balloon and see what they do.
Right.
And then somebody said, see, I told you, they don't do anything, and we've got to make sure that the South Koreans and their allies know that they're not going to come to their assistance, and they better join us, the rising power, and divorce from the descending power. And the Biden administration, either thinks that this is not important, or they don't really care, or they're scared of China. But, I don't understand one thing, is that they're afraid of having a confrontation with China, but every time somebody warns them that we're getting very dangerous with Putin, and when Putin's threatening nuclear strikes, if we escalate in our arms in Ukraine, they say, oh, don't worry, Putin can't be serious. But they take a balloon very seriously if they shoot it down there. Apparently, they were afraid for days of escalating with China, but they don't care at all that we're getting very dangerous territory in Ukraine. And it all derives, I think, to a certain extent around domestic politics, that the left is so compromised by China.
That's where I was going to go with this. I just want to squeeze this last question in. Yeah, I agree with you. Do you think this has anything to do with the fact that the State of the Union's coming up and this would have been an ongoing humiliation?
Well, yeah, I think that if people in the media and the public hadn't raised their voices, they would have stuck with the idea that the balloon was not important. It was just a primitive surveillance apparatus, or they would have said we were worried about Americans. And the outcry came so loud and frequent that they had to do something. And then, of course, now they're embarrassed because people are saying you could have done this the first day it approached U.S. territory and it wouldn't have hurt anybody. And Americans are not so worried about the fallout. They're worried about their strategic deterrence being surveilled at their own peril. So that was a bogus argument. We're worried about Americans and debris. Well, we're more worried about China having some nuclear advantages over us. That's an existential question, not a matter of some debris hitting some Americans.
All right, let's take that apart. China's sabotaging the diplomatic meetings with Secretary Blinken. We'll see more about him in the next short segment we have. Where we go. Why would they do that? Because they don't care. They don't want diplomacy. And by the way, for any of you who don't know who Victor Davis Hanson is, Victor Davis Hanson is a researcher. He's written books on wars dating back into ancient history. So he's got an opinion that needs to be valued. He's not just somebody carnival barking for attention. So here we go. It's obvious to many of us Americans, like myself, that we're compromised. How deeply we're compromised, we got to actually wonder. Because we're talking about the government. We showed you the facade they put on in segment number 1. Because they're covering up from the Ukraine piggy bank. Some of them have their own agenda because they did not assimilate into the United States, into our melting pot. Now we have this thing with China here. That's an in-your-face disgrace. They just ran it through. And our military allowed it to happen. Our military allowed this to happen. You hear all the things that Dan was talking about, what's been infiltrated in our country and spied upon. And he also said how they have military police, Chinese military police, set up in the USA. So now this goes down the chain, right down to our own police departments. They're all allowing this to happen. And you've got to ask why. Who is in command of our military? How deep does China go? Who is in command? Like DJ was talking about, NORAD. NORAD protects North America. And we don't even know why they allowed this to happen. Who's telling them to hold off? Who are our military people? Sons, daughters, neighbors? Who are they taking their orders from? These are questions that need to be asked right now. Like I said, if anything like this was done in China, they would have already executed these people. So here's what we say. The Republicans have now taken command of the House. So they're going to want some answers. The crimes committed by these people, Fauci and everybody else, and this funding that's going to the Chinese military, all these are serious crimes with serious punishments. So you got to really be concerned. And remember, this is a document that our founders gave us, just in case anything really, how did these weird ever happen? Well, this isn't just weird. We're talking about war. Now, if you don't believe a compromise, watch this next short piece. Roll that.
Biden went to Penn, Communist China paid millions of dollars to fund what he was doing. Communist China, we also know, paid Hunter Biden and the Biden family millions of dollars. And so there's a long history of Communist China writing checks. The fact that University of Delaware is trying to keep these documents secret, in fact, it said it's not going to release any of them until 2 years after Biden leaves public office, I think that's unacceptable.
And that was Senator Ted Cruz with me last week on this program on the University of Delaware refusing to release any of the 1,850 boxes of documents from President Biden as questions swirl over Communist China's infiltration of American universities and Biden's gross negligence in handling the nation's most sensitive secrets. This after we learned Communist China donated some $60 million to the University of Pennsylvania to create the Penn Biden Center, where classified documents were also stored. Biden placed several Penn leaders into key positions in his administration afterwards.
So China builds Joe Biden a library. Remember, now we're still going back to the Obama administration here. Look at these people. She's going to tell you exactly who they are and what they received as a reward. Blinken.
Former Penn Biden Center Director Anthony Blinken was named Secretary of State. Former university president Amy Gutmann is now the ambassador to Germany. And former chairman of the Penn board, David Cohen, is now the ambassador to Canada. The University of Pennsylvania was also able to successfully lobby Joe Biden to shut down the so-called China Initiative, which was investigating China's surveillance and its intellectual property theft.
I can tell you this. Ukraine and Russia would have never happened if I was there. And Taiwan, which is a possibility, a strong possibility, would never, ever have happened if I were there.
I can guarantee that. It would have never happened. They wouldn't have dared try to step on our nation the way they did under Trump. Because now we have the military. We showed you in several shows that whole January 6th thing, and even though we talked about it in part 1, about what they did and how that could have been stopped, was allowed to happen. That whole January 6th thing was set up through the Department of Defense, the DTRA. Look it up. Look at this site. Look what they do. They'll tell you right there. It won't tell you anything about January 6th. If you look at what they do, you can start to connect the dots yourself. Trump was strong. He had people around him that were strong. How trustworthy they were? Well, they weren't as, shall we say, trustworthy to him. And we're going to find out more about that as the presidential elections start coming up. But they were and did have a loyalty to the country. Whether they could even fathom that Biden would have let it go this far, I don't know. I don't know how they couldn't. So right now, we have to really question who we can trust as we the people. This is our document. Our founders set it up. Government no longer serves the people. Checks and balances. Either less checks and balances. So anyone coming after any of your rights, got to make a stand now. And hopefully there'll be a whole bunch of people who stand around you that understand this. The more people are educated, the more we know. But with that being said, we'll look in part 3 at the other way they're coming at us. And then we have to ask, who's compromised there too? With that being said, we'll see you in part 3.